What's up, military millionaires? I'm your host, David Perret, and I'm here with the ever fabulous Alex Felice. I don't even think I should say co-host, because if he does what he always does, I'll be the co-host of this episode by about 5 minutes in. Hey, everybody, if you have not heard yet, we are doing a live, in-person real estate event May 19th through the 21st in Tampa, Florida. I would love to see you there. We have 50 slots, 13 are already sold, and it's only open for War Room Mastermind members. So if you are a War Room member, make sure you head on over to the Circle community and grab your ticket right now, secure your spot. If you are not in the War Room Mastermind and you've been thinking about it, hit me up so I can get you that Mastermind application and you can get enrolled and get a spot, because they're selling quickly. We only announced the spots 2 days ago, and like I said, 13 of the 50 are already gone. So I'd love to have you there. We're going to have some really cool speakers. We're going to do some happy hour, some drinks, some hangouts, some networking, some restaurants, some really cool speakers, guest speakers, keynote, whatever. And we're going to do some property tours and some cold plunges and sauna action. So good times for all. Come hang out. See you in Tampa. As soon as I'm done doing the intro, Alex will take over all the questions, and I'll sit back quietly and let him do all the hard work and heavy lifting. So it'll be great. So the host of the show, Alex Felice. Alex, how you doing today?
David, I really appreciate you coming on and supporting me in my efforts on the Military Millionaire podcast. Dude, I'm super, super thankful to be here. Excited as always. And I'm really excited to talk to our guest today. We talked a little bit before the show about purpose, something that I personally struggle with. I think a lot of people struggle with, certainly our military veterans.
Me too. Brodie and I met in Austin last month at Jason Drees' event. He's got over 10,000 coaching sessions logged as he's a performance coach and has been for over 15 years. Worked with Tony Robbins, now works with Jason Drees, and he's been doing coaching for a long, long time. And he gave a presentation on purpose and finding your purpose and alignment in Austin. But more importantly, outside of the presentation, he and I just started talking about it offhand, off to the side while we were there. And, he just kind of came up and was like, hey, if you ever need a guest, I'd love to come and talk about it. And I was like, that's one of the things that resonates with me really deeply within the veteran community. I think losing identity and purpose when you transition out of the military is a very, very, very under-discussed problem. And I think it resonates with a lot of people, unfortunately, after they go through the problem. So we're going to solve it right now, or at least talk about it. Brodie, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for making the space to talk about this foundational topic that we all live with, deal with, and grapple with in our life and through different stages of our life. Yeah, thanks for creating the space for.
You want to give a little bit more
kind of support,
background to who Brodie is and how you got into, being so interested in purpose before we dig in the weeds and have some fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I would say I'm an adventurer. I like to find my own answers. I like to ask questions and find, like I said, my own answers to those questions. And it's a big world, and there's lots to explore. And I found that early on as a young adult, the guidance that I was getting from the authorities in my life, for me personally, just wasn't really directing me in the direction I wanted to go. And so I bought myself a one-way ticket to Central America. I packed my backpack and went to find myself first thing after high school. And then once I got out of college, I went to college, completed that, and then packed my backpack again and moved up into a teepee on the side of a mountain and went to find myself again even more. And what I was searching for was purpose. And at first it felt very exciting that I was setting out on this journey to find purpose, to figure out who I really was and what was important to me and what I was going to do. And over the next 2-3 years, I started to find that answering those questions, what's my purpose, why am I here, who am I really, they started to be very difficult to answer. And I sought out advice and input at the time, there was no such thing. I didn't know about coaching. I had a little bit of an idea of what a mentor might be, but that wasn't a thing back then in my world. And I found it incredibly difficult to find people who could help me find my answers. And that's what coaching is. That's what led me to coaching. Is I found that when you give someone advice, it doesn't really stick very often. Maybe 10% of the time, that person will actually take that advice and run with it, and it will work. 90% of the time, it's irrelevant because they have something else going on. So coaching is a powerful vehicle to help somebody find their own answers. And what I ended up going through, it got very dark for me around 22, 23. It was one of the darkest, most difficult parts of my life, literally trying to find my purpose and feeling like I was losing my mind. And I actually got to a point where I completely blacked out. I went unconscious and lost my mind. And luckily I got it back. I'm fine now, but that's the only time in my life I ever lost consciousness like that. And I don't know how long I laid there, but this is in the middle of the forest floor, in the middle of the woods, trying to find myself, like that kind of a difficult point in my journey, a coming of age, a crisis, personal crisis. And it got so bad that literally I felt my brain disconnect and I blacked out. And when I came back, long story short, I started getting answers. And I had this experience where I felt my brain reconfiguring itself and it felt like it was physically plugging itself back in a new pattern. As I started to get these answers of who I was and what I was here for. And that was the beginning of a journey where I've continued to get answers ever since. And because it was so difficult for me to find my purpose, it's become a big part of my mission to help other people find theirs. And I do this all the time. Like, it's one thing to have a theory. It's another thing to see it work over and over and over again with people from all walks of life. And so that's why I'm here.
For the record, South America, finding ourselves blackout. Was this there ayahuasca or no? I'm just kidding.
That takes later. Yeah, that whole part of my life was very, very clean. There was no drugs, no alcohol. I was literally on a vision quest to clear my mind and figure out what I was going to do with my life and what mattered and who I was. When I discovered was that everything I believed wasn't necessarily true. And that because, there's other people out there who believe the opposite. So who's right? Who am I to say? And in that process, all my truths, all my beliefs crumbled. And I felt like I was at a very vulnerable place and that I didn't have any answers. That was pretty scary. But yeah, the ayahuasca came later. I did one ayahuasca journey.
I didn't actually know that had been a part of your story when I asked about
10 years ago.
Yeah,
it's something you do if you're called and in the right situation, if it's part of your path. And I made sure to do it traditional. Anyway, it was something I was called for.
I've heard some
very powerful,
some pretty cool and scary experiences about that. We looked into nobody I am close to listens to my podcast. We looked into doing that. We were in Peru doing the Machu Picchu trek, but we weren't there long enough to do it traditionally with a shaman, so wasn't in the cards last year. But
yeah, it's one of those things where you need to be, like a lot of things in life, you're stepping into something. You need to be willing to face fear, and you need to be willing to face darkness. We can all relate to what a dark thought is, a difficult experience in life, what fear is like when we confront it. It's just a condensed experience where those things can come up. And so one of the greatest gifts I got out of that experience, among many, was learning how to transform fear. And to me, how that relates to purpose and all that is over the years, I've discovered and developed a series of what I call purpose codes. And these are processes and tools that I use to help people find their purpose and to step into it and align with it. And one of those is this process of accepting what is. It's, this, how to transform fear. The first step is accept what's here instead of resist it. But anyway, that's a bit of an idea of sort of my background and why I do what I do and why I'm so passionate about purpose. It's not the first thing people think of. Is purpose. It sort of comes on the back end of things when people aren't looking for meaning first. People are looking for a certain lifestyle, things they want to do, things they want to accomplish. But when what you're setting out to do isn't working, or it doesn't feel right for you, and you feel like there's more and you're made for more and you're struggling.
Brodie, let me ask you,
Purpose becomes very important.
part of the reason why I think veterans struggle is because, the military gives a higher order of purpose, something that's bigger than themselves. And this is the same thing religion does, right? It's something bigger than you, and then you're a piece of it. And, there's sort of guideposts within all religions to help answer a lot of these questions. And so one of my criticisms of American culture now, especially, I was part of the problem actually, is too much self, too much like this is my purpose for my life and all these things, and it's too much about me and not about something bigger than me, and that was still is a big part of my problem. So I'm curious of your thoughts about how that works within what you do.
Love that topic. So notice in my journey to get here, I said I lost my mind. What I actually did was I lost myself in that process, and I had to rediscover myself. So sometimes, one of the things Jesus taught was that you have to lose yourself to find yourself. Two things I want to say about that. One, sometimes the old version of you needs to die or go to bed or go to sleep for the next version of you to lead. And always, in steps to find your purpose, connecting and exploring something bigger than you and being in that process of exploring it and getting curious about it, opening up to it as a possibility. That's a great way to open the door to find purpose, because when we're focused on ourself, we're really focused on our ego. And our ego is our thinking. It's essentially ego is who we think we are. And ego, the pattern of ego, it creates separation. So it separates us automatically from what's bigger, something that could be bigger than us, something we're a part of. It also separates us from true connection to our work and the people around us. It also separates us from our true self. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing is there's a really negative connotation around being selfish, right? It's seen as a negative thing. But to truly be in service, the more selfish we can be, the better leaders we can become. And let me clarify that. So what I mean is, if you're truly focused on what you really want and creating that and leading that and focus on who you can be and what you can actually do and what's true for you, I feel like you're going to produce a better result. And that's a form of, focus on self, but it's different than being like selfish, where you're just taking everything for you. Nobody else matters. I'm the most important, right? There's two different forms of selfishness, just like there's two different forms of self. One is our little self with that thinking mind, who we think we are. And one is our bigger self. So that's our awareness, our conscious awareness.
Well, it's like the oxygen mask thing,
before any label.
I mean, if you don't have a sense of purpose, or if you don't have a mission, or you don't have it. If you're trying to work through something, like I guess a good example would be, my wife and I having a marital struggle, and there's also like time to spend with the kids, or there's time to spend with us. And it's like, well, we should spend all the time with the kids, or we should spend the time working on us. But if we spend the time working on us, then we're pulling away from the kids and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, if we don't spend the time working on us, then the time with the kids is going to be split. And so it's tempting to spend all the time with the kids, but you got to spend the time away from the kids in order to spend more time with the kids. Like, and that's like a weird analogy, but people say being selfish is bad, right? Because that's how we grow up. You should be selfless and da 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 da. There's a time and a place where if you need to turn the focus on you, it's the old like airplane oxygen mask thing, right? If you don't get yourself right, you can't really help or service other people in the way, with full potential.
Yeah, I agree. There's a process to being able to be selfless. Is another way to say it, right? So, and sometimes the most selfless thing we can do is be selfish. Because, for example, in the example you use with a relationship, you've got two people, right? And so who you bring to the relationship matters. And who you bring is dependent on how you take care of yourself and if your needs are being met. If you're essentially taking care of yourself, you have a good relationship with yourself. That's really important for a good relationship with another person. And when you talk about mission, having a mission, when you're in the military, you have a very clear mission, right? It's a great organization, like you said, Alex, where you're connected to something bigger than you. You're in service. You're part of a team. And so that's you have a sense of purpose, right? One way of describing purpose is it's a felt sense. It's a quality of experience that we have, a fullness to our life and our experience of what we do. And then when you don't have that anymore, you're not part of that group. How do you recreate that? Or, even if you're not in the military, let's say you leave, you change careers and you're not, and you've been part of a team all this time, or you go out on your own and you start your own business. How do you create that camaraderie, that team, that mission? And I think that in order to get to that level of selfless service and purpose and mission, where you're serving something bigger than you, you have to go in and find yourself and what matters to you and what you're taking a stand for. Versus just going out and being with everybody else. You have to go inward and find yourself. Like, I didn't know who I was, and what I found was fucking amazing. I found out I'm much more than this, this label called Brodie Whitney, and these thoughts that I have. I discovered that actually my thinking is my thinking, and I can actually observe my thinking and step into this conscious awareness or witness version of me that is watching the whole thing and is available to be a director. And I can actually operate from that place of conscious awareness. And then I'm not in the, I'm not necessarily on the ups and downs, the roller coaster of life that's happening, but I'm watching it. Now I can be a more effective leader. Now I'm not, like, when you go through a place of questioning your purpose and yourself and it feels hopeless and you don't know what to do and you try stuff and it doesn't work and it doesn't fit with how you see yourself, that you can get bowled over by the emotion. You can get taken out by the emotion, right? If you have a sense of something that's important to you, maybe that's your kids, maybe it's a future family, maybe it's a vision of yourself that you want to become, or some sense of purpose or a difference you want to make, that can be essential to get you through those emotions. The other thing is, when you really discover who you actually are, then you have a tool to be able to lead yourself. You have a tool to be able to observe the emotions, observe the thoughts, observe the situation, no matter how difficult it is, and ask questions from a witness place versus the one who's in it just having a really hard time. So I don't know if that makes any sense. Like, does that make sense?
It's a bit abstract. Can you tell me a little bit about? Can you tell me a little bit about like the actual process, like when you meet somebody, like what's that look like to help them?
Yeah, great. So this is great. This is where it'll become more tangible. So basically, when people are trying to find their purpose, they usually are asking and thinking, what am I supposed to do with my life? And when they describe it, they say, I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life. That's the most common phrase when people are trying to find their purpose. And if they're trying to figure out purpose, then where are they? They're in their head. They're thinking about it. And with that strategy, they'll never come to a satisfying answer, because our thoughts are always changing, and it might feel purposeful for a little bit, but it will change. And so changing the question is the better approach. So instead of, what am I supposed to do with my life? Or in your head trying to figure out your purpose, you want to ask a better question. And a much better question is, who do I want to be and become? Because everything that we do, if you're talking about what am I supposed to do with my life, everything you do comes from who you're being. And when you focus on being that version, what I found, and working with a lot of people on this, it's much easier to access who you want to be than do the things that you want to do without changing who you are. Right? So, for example, if you come out of the military and you're looking for what next and on purpose for you, purposeful, and you're trying to figure out what to do to bring that sense of purpose back, you're going to struggle, because nothing you do is going to give you the fulfillment that you're looking for, because we're not human doings, right? We're human beings. So getting a vision of who you want to be and become, and that could be as simple as, I want to be a great father, or I want to be a successful business owner, or I want to be happy in my life and have the sense of fulfillment and purpose. I want to have a mission again, and I want to be someone leading a mission. Then the being is much easier to access than the doing. So instead of saying, what am I supposed to do with my life? Say, who do I want to be?
Ralph Waldo Emerson has a famous quote that says, a man is what he thinks about all day long. And I think that feels appropriate. I think about that a lot. Hey, let me ask you a hard question. Is Jason Drees a hypnotist?
No, he's not a hypnotist.
I don't believe you.
I don't think he's ever studied as a hypnotist, but if you want to help someone align and change their thoughts and break through limiting beliefs that are holding someone back, then simple things like hypnotic phrases can be very helpful.
So
Yes.
So the context there is that Jason came on this podcast, and Alex, we did the frame shifting exercise, and Alex went through it. And Alex has been doing all this videography and creative content stuff, and that was kind of the point of the frame shift. And afterwards, Alex texts me or calls me, and he's like, "Bro, I feel like I don't know what happened, but I feel like I was just hypnotized, and I have no idea what happened, but that was whack." And I feel he's like, I feel like I was hypnotized, and it was a good show, and I still don't know if I believe all this stuff. And that was what, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, something like that. I mean, we'll say 6. And now what are you doing full time?
One thing about a brain shift is, and this relates to who you want to be versus what do you want to do. If I led my life based on who I am by default, not who I really am and the authentic me, I mean, just who I am by default, I don't think I'd be a very effective person, honestly. I don't think I would be doing much that was worth talking about and making the kind of difference that I make in people's lives. I actually have to choose who I want to be. I've actually had to come up with a vision of myself that inspired me. Before I thought about anything about what I was going to do with that, who do I want to be and become? And so I've explored, just like you did, Alex, with the exercise with frame shift, you're exploring a different version of you, a different way of focusing, a different identity, a different archetype, which is a pattern of focus. And so for me, it's been like when I talk about who you want to be and become as a way to find your purpose, that means going through a process of exploring the different versions of you. And it starts with becoming aware of the versions of you that are currently leading your life and your focus. So one of the archetypes I would say for you, Alex, is the skeptic, right?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Alex? No.
Oh, yeah.
Alex believes everything.
My fiance calls it my suspicious eyes, which I do about 1,000 times a day. I'm just like, bullshit.
So that's one of the frames that you operate by, and you wouldn't use it if it hadn't been helpful to you. What happens when I go through this kind of a process with people is usually they'll discover there's a series of versions of themselves that are leading that really aren't, that are actually not helpful, and even more so, causing a lot of struggle.
Can you add to that? Can you list some of those? Because I'd be really curious to know. I'd love you to say some of that out loud so that somebody listening can say, oh, I do that.
For sure. So the first thing is to say, who's leading right now in my life? What version of me is this? And if I were to give them a name, what's their name? When I first did this, I discovered that the doubter, the quitter, and the critic were leading my life. This is probably like 12, 13 years ago. And the overthinker is another one that comes up. The procrastinator. Yeah, the doubter. But it wasn't just the doubter, the quitter, and the critic. So the doubter in my mind would say, you can't do this. It's not going to work. And the quitter would say, well, why even start if it's not going to work? And then the critic would say, and who the fuck do you think you are anyway to do this? And when I recognized that pattern, I realized this was, basically what happened is I hired a coach to help me get more present in my life. This is the first exercise we did. Right? And so this is with Ben Austin. I don't know if you know Ben, but incredible coach, incredible human, phenomenal leader. And that showed me the patterns in my life that were creating the chaos. Another mentor of mine, Mark von Muser, said, without leadership, we have chaos. And so I had chaos because I did not have effective leadership. I also discovered some other versions of myself that were just fine, but really weren't going to get me where I wanted to go. One of them I called the beach bum. He just wanted to hang out and do nothing all day long. And that was not what I was aiming for in my life. So
that guy's fun. He's fun to hang out with sometimes.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Yeah. Now you're a dune buggy bum or a side by side bum.
Exactly. And then I started discovering. So the first part is who's leading. Get curious about that. If you can name them, awesome. The second part is to say who needs to lead. And this is another way of starting to explore, who do I want to be? So who needs to lead in my life right now? And this is where you gain each one of us, every single person has access to any frame, any archetype you can dream up. And I think they're infinite. For example, the motivated couch potato, right? Loves just sitting on the couch all day long watching Netflix, and he's motivated to do it. Don't make it a priority. Or the king, or the general, the warrior, the magician, the husband, the father, the primal self, the lover, the future self, the little boy. Like, these are some of the archetypes where you start to be able to tap into a whole new pattern of focus, and versions of yourself that you can trust to lead. This is a great way to organize our thoughts and steer our focus and step into our purpose all at the same time. Is what version of me or versions of me do I trust the most? And literally over time, once you have leadership with inner leadership, this is about inner leadership, right? It's about organized, you've heard of multiple personality disorder. Well, we all have multiple personalities, and a lot of them aren't in order. And this is a way to create some order and power and effectiveness to our inner world. And so, since discovering and over these last 10 plus years developing my most trusted version, which I call my king, he's the one that carries the mission. And along with that, having my warrior along with him who's ready to fucking go and do whatever it takes in any moment. That's a powerful team. That actually helps some of these less than optimal archetypes become useful. For example, every once in a while, I will invite the doubter to get input because he'll consider options. He'll look at things in a way that nobody else will look at. But if he's leading, it doesn't work and it's chaos. But if I have better leadership, if the king's leading, then he becomes the critical thinker. And all of a sudden I get perspectives that are very valuable. Doesn't mean they're true or I'm going to move forward with them or it's what's going to happen. But it's information that I can use when I'm looking
that's
at
interesting.
making a move or making a decision.
I'm thinking about it. I don't really have much experience thinking sort of in that way. So what's the ramp up period when you get somebody to tell them all this stuff? How long does it take to get them acclimated to this sort of thinking and adjust and make it useful?
Extremely quickly, like within a 20-minute conversation, they've identified their archetypes and they've even identified the archetypes they want to start leaning into and developing. Others, it could take several weeks, a call a week. And in terms of getting someone started, it can take a 5-minute conversation. In order to actually start experiencing and exploring and sort of sensing these different archetypes within yourself and being able to call on new archetypes, my experience is for almost everybody, like 98% of people, it's very quick and they're way more available than would make sense, right? Because if you think of yourself becoming this ultimate version of you, how long do you think it's going to take you? It's like we're hoping to do it in this lifetime, right? Whereas with the archetypes, some would call it shifting frames. It's another way to look at it. You can gain access to them in a heartbeat, right? Like take a moment right now and get a sense of your king, the king within you, or that leader that you.
I'm not doing any more exercises. You would be hypnotized.
Well, are you afraid you might end up living the life you want?
Just teasing.
For the record, he got the job doing the thing.
Pretty cool.
I am not criticizing. I have no criticism of Jason Drees or that conversation. I just thought it was a very.
The best part about it is you were like in a car in like the back seat driving around with like the worst service in the world. Like bouncing around in the backseat of a car on the way back from like somewhere with Shelby or whatever while we were recording that show.
Yeah, I wasn't even like in like a quiet, like vulnerable space. I was in a moving car. Yeah, it was really interesting. But
Yeah, this is stuff you can use. This is real life. You don't need to, go climb into a cave or go on a retreat to start using this stuff. Actually, real life is a great vehicle to apply this.
yeah, I have no criticism. I mean, that was a great experience. I have no criticism, but I have for the last few months. I've been asking about you guys. I'm like, are they a bunch of hypnotists? And everybody says no. But then you're like, well, it's got elements that might be considered, and I'm like, But again, not critical. Just it's just been a funny little journey. But this stuff does work.
Yeah, it does.
Or certainly in my my very limited experience, I was like, look, I did it on a podcast and it worked, so I know one-on-one.
Well, my answer would be,
I'm sure
my answer would be that even
Absolutely.
even if it was 100% hypnotism, mission accomplished.
Does it work?
Yeah,
You know?
again, I have no criticism.
Yeah.
I don't care.
It's like
I wanted to put a name to it. And that was
it's like
name.
the everybody
That's a
hate,
word that
not
came to
everybody,
mind.
but a lot of people hate on Robert's book Rich Dad Poor Dad. They're like, oh well, it was not real. And I'm like, okay, he found a creative way to make a really boring subject written in a way that's easy to digest, that got a ton of people interested in a topic that changed their life. Who cares? Harmless.
Yeah, I'm not a stickler for I'm not, snakes don't talk, but the Bible still works. Like, I'm not a super stickler for what real in terms of like technical.
But is there another approach?
Yeah, please, absolutely.
Okay, because there's so many. Honestly, what I believe is we're all looking for our own approach that works for us, and that life is giving us over and over and over again all kinds of ways to find our purpose. Some are inside the box, some are outside the box, but I honestly believe that life is directing us in this direction. Maybe it's, the conversation you had with the person at the till, or, the bad haircut you just got. It's just whatever. Life is always unfolding in this direction. Couple others that work for me is understanding that the story you're telling yourself is your life and your experience. And so this is another way where if you've got the skeptic or you've got the doubter narrating your life, then the result in the experience, you can actually predict them if you step back and think about it. So what's the story you're telling? And is it a good story? And is it guiding you to where you ultimately want to go? That's one, is looking at story. The one I use first with most clients is called present moment purpose. And this is something, I haven't heard it anywhere else. It's based on the premise that we're all already living our purpose. We're right now in this moment, in this present moment, we're on our path. It couldn't be any way, because we can't argue with reality. So the question isn't, what's my purpose? And I need to find my purpose. The question is, what's the purpose I'm living right now in this moment? Like, what's the story that I'm living right now? Who am I being right now? It's all the same question. And I'd invite you to ask yourself that question. What's the purpose I'm living right now? What that does is it reconnects us to our purpose, because a lot of people are trying to find their purpose or what they're going to do with their life and believing that they're disconnected from it. Actually, right in this moment, you're fully on your path. The question is, is this a true reflection of what you're made for and what you believe you're capable of? And if it is, awesome. If it isn't, what would feel purposeful? How could you improve? Like, what could you do to feel more on purpose? But instead of saying, what can I do to be more on purpose, from a place of I'm not on purpose, it's very different than I am on purpose, and how do I create even more of this?
What about asking other people what they think? Is that a useful exercise? If you say, hey, I don't know what my purpose is, what if you ask your friends and family what they see about you that you maybe don't see?
yeah, it is important who you ask, for sure. And it's one place to look. There's like in a traditional, what would it be, like a traditional process of finding one's purpose, let's say in traditional tribes in the past, people would go through a rite of passage, right, to find themselves. Maybe it's 4 days in the wilderness with no food, no water, and then they come back, and then they're re-welcomed into the tribe, and in that process they're witnessed by the tribe as an adult or in a new role in the tribe or community. And that witnessing helps to solidify their new identity or their new role, right? So other people are powerful reflections for us and can be very helpful in this kind of a process. Number one, ask people you trust. Ask people who you feel are going to give you an honest, valuable input. And also check in to see if it's true for you, the input. Don't just believe what other people are saying, because nobody knows you. And what's
that part's not a weakness of mine, because I'm skeptical and I sort of have the opinion. I say this about 75% playfully, but I'm sort of, my general consensus about the world is that everybody in the whole world except me is an idiot. So I don't really take much of what they say I very, very like, okay, I'll take what you think, but I'm not buying it. Without deep analysis. It's just that's it. If you wanted to know if I was a skeptic, that's how I start. That's like how my brain starts.
Well, there is, like we even signed there is a lot of BS out there. In my world of coaching, there's a lot of people who aren't coaches. They're consultants or salespeople. And what coaching is, it's helping people find the answers that are in them. And to find a way to communicate this stuff with an individual or a group that resonates with them, that hits home for them. I think a lot of stuff I said in the beginning may be kind of abstract for people. It's kind of opening up doors. Some listeners are going to be like, holy shit, like I needed to hear that, and that triggered something for me. That's in a good way. Other people are going to be like, I don't get it. So what we're striving for here is, what's one thing that you could take and explore? Let the skeptic lead, but test it out. For example, when I first heard about, visualizing and manifesting stuff, I was like, whatever. I mean, that's just not going to work. And then I tried it. I experimented with it. And I was like, holy shit. This is a powerful tool.
Well,
so,
and it kind of goes back. Kind of goes back to the speed.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it kind of goes back to the same idea as the hypnotism. It's like, with a lot of that stuff, whether it works or not, or you believe it or it doesn't, my mentality's kind of been, yeah, but when it comes to something like, the idea of what you think becomes reality, and the idea that if you think negative thoughts, that's what comes, and if you think positive thoughts, that's what comes, and you manifest the reality. If you think that's bullshit or you don't think that's bullshit, well, if you think it's bullshit, that's great. Would you rather be wrong and have erred on the side of positive thinking, or be wrong and have erred on the side of negative thinking? Rather be wrong and have erred on the side of positive thinking. Like,
yeah. Well, as much as I'm skeptical, I also am sort of this position where anybody who's in there, I'm 39, so I'll be 40, but I think anybody who looks at their life and is listening to this and says, well, I want to find out purpose, or I want more, as soon as you're in a position, especially if you're an adult, right? If you're 18, maybe even up to like probably 25, and you don't know who you are, it's like, well, of course you don't. But if you're an adult and you've seen a little bit of life and you're still, I think there's always going to be a never-ending question about like purpose and meaning. I think that's inherent. But anybody who has that problem and wants to solve it, and then is now willing and now is saying, like, I'm not going to do this, that, and the other thing because I don't think it will work, even though I haven't tried it. I think first you found your first big problem for sure. And so, like, anytime you're like, I have a problem and I want to solve it, then the first thing should be like, well, you should consider all angles at least. And there's a lot of things out there that, life is just is a lot of figuring out the things that you thought aren't right. So the first, in my opinion, step would be like, well, what are all the things that how do I say it? If I don't have the life I want, I have to do something I haven't done.
I meant to go back real quick and revisit the part where Alex said that
I love that
the whole world is idiots, and just point out if you've ever heard the phrase about like if you got like a friend group and you're like, man, there's nobody in my group that's the weird one, then you're the weird one. Move on. I just have to get like one jab at Alex every show, or it's not a good show.
What I'd love to see for people, because there's a lot of conversation in this conversation. There's a lot of focus on thinking, right? We do a lot of thinking. We want to figure stuff out. We got a bullshit meter, all that stuff. But how do we find out if something is actually true for us? And we can't figure that out with our head. We can use our head to find the right strategy, but we can't figure out if something's true, as far as I've found. But truth is my number one value. So how do I find it? We all want truth. We all want to find our truth, live our truth, and experience truth. How do we find it? It's not in thinking. One way to find it is by tuning into your physical body and how your body responds to certain input. And actually starting to use your body as a vehicle to identify truth or alignment or purpose. It's all the same thing. Purpose, alignment, truth, it's all the same. And our thinking is going to tell us all kinds of things. The challenge with our thinking is it's largely designed for survival, not for happiness. And so it's giving you all the warning flags on why something might be bullshit, or what, look out for this. They might get the wall pulled over your head. You might lose your, and so thinking is going to give you all the warning flags. But your thinking mind is very different than your unconscious mind that's aware of so much more. So how do you tap into your unconscious mind? It's through your body. That might sound very abstract right now, but it's not. It's very tangible. You have a physical body, right? And your body has physical sensations, contraction, relaxation, right? So you can tune into and pay attention to how your body responds to certain input, not in your emotions, not in your thoughts. Those can still happen, but by paying attention to how your physical body responds. If it relaxes and feels like it's expanding, it's truth. If it tenses up and contracts, it's not true for you. Or even more specifically, it's not true for you now. So if you're considering, for example, you're considering a new career path, or you've got an option between two different jobs, how do you choose? This is one way. You can basically imagine yourself saying yes to one and notice what your physical body does. Does it tense up and contract, or does it relax and expand? That's one way to tune into your unconscious, because your thinking brain that's measured is able to process 40 bits of information per second. So the tool we use all day long to think processes about 40 bits of information per second. Our unconscious mind, guess how much it can process per second? 4 million bits per second. So if we can start to tap into that, then we become more effective in our decision making. How important are decisions? How important are decisions, making decisions from a place of alignment?
Well, I also like this because, you are what you do. It doesn't matter what you tell people you are, or even what you tell yourself. And, some examples, like everybody sort of knows me now as a photographer, and it's not because I tell them I'm a photographer. It's not because my Instagram, which it doesn't say photographer, my Instagram doesn't say photographer. It's because every time you see me, I'm holding a camera. Right. And I'm giving you pictures of you or whatever the case. And so real estate investors are the same way. It's like, how do you know you're a real estate investor? Is it because you put shit on your profile, or is it because you say it, or because you want to do it, or is it because you tell people you're a real estate investor? I do think there's some value in like saying things out loud. I do, but you can tell in a balance sheet, right? Like you can tell because I went to the title company and I signed for a property and I had to deal with a tenant, and it's the behaviors that you do. So I like this exercise because, well, I like the sort of the how we got here, because I do think life is so much about it's all what you've done and very little about what you aspire to do. Or, I mean, those are important, but at the end of the day, when you look back on your life, it's going to be the memories of who you are, not all the things that you could have done in your head when you were daydreaming. Those go away. And you said earlier about overthinking, and I think a lot of people do suffer from high neuroticism. Dave is like the effing worst, right? He is so neurotic, and I just tease him and tease him and tease him, and I just get to plant nuclear bombs in his head. No effort on my part. And it's like, you can go through this whole thing about your head about like, oh, I'm going to start, a podcast and it's going to do great, but then, it'll be a lot of work. And then, well, I'm going to quit in 5 years anyways. And you go through this whole like process in your head and your mentally, and then you don't end up doing it. And it's like, this is all for nothing. Or, I want to be a real estate investor, and you think about all the, oh, what if my tenant tears my place up? So then I just end up doing it. Or sometimes worse. I think people get excited about their theoretical success in their head, and then they never have to do it because they're sort of satisfied about what they could do. Oh, I'd write a book and it'd be a bestseller, so like I'm kind of good because I don't have to do it now because I know that it would be so successful. And it's like, this is maybe one of the most unhealthy things a person can do to themselves. And so I just I don't really have a question. Just wanted to comment. Like, I love that the focus is on the physical rather than the mental.
Well, I mean, we start with this question: what am I supposed to do with my life? What am I supposed to be doing that's going to be meaningful to me? And so I'm just offering what I have found to be the quickest ways to get there, because it's really hard to figure out what you're supposed to be doing with your life with thinking alone. But all these exercises, I think I've shared 3 different ones on this podcast. They're not the end of the road. They're to lead you back to what you're here to do and create. Because again, if you can identify who you want to be, for example, you could be a real estate investor, or you could be a successful real estate investor. And those are 2 different identities that you can start with. So what does a real estate investor do when you're just getting started out? What does a successful real estate investor do? They do different things, right? And so if I want to be a coach, do I want to be a coach, or do I want to be a professional coach? What do professional coaches do compared to all the other coaches up there? Well, I want to do those things, but it's who I'm being. And if you can identify a version of you, and when you can identify a version of you that inspires you, that you authentically want to be and become, and it requires growth to get there, that's all you need. You're going to do the things to get there once you have identified who you want to be, because that's the real motivation, and it's much more accessible than creating a certain result or doing a certain activity. Like, if you decide you're going to be an athlete, here's a great example. Before I even knew anything about coaching, I was a custom furniture builder. In my own company, I built custom furniture for like 8 years. And at a certain point, what was once my passion, it's all I wanted to do, became my prison. And I just needed to get out. My body was a mess. I was in my shop all day, all the gear, just in this, it felt like prison. But I built this great business, and I needed change. And every time I asked, when you ask someone, I went out and I told people, and I asked people, do you think I should quit this business? And I'm done. And everyone said the exact same thing for like almost 2 years. They said, literally word for word, you can't quit now. You built this great business and you make such beautiful furniture. I think probably 10 different people told me that. And I bought the story every time until I had a breaking point, and I shut the breaker down and locked the door behind me. And I turned around and I put my arms up to the sky and I said, what's next? I'm done. And then the first thing I learned was the power of identity. And I learned that everything that we do, we do to try to align with who our identity. The most powerful force in the human personality is the need to stay consistent with how we define ourselves. So I was in a stage of my life where my only identity was woodworker. I was a father and that, but when I went through the exercise, I was like, I'm a woodworker. What do? I read woodworking magazines. I do woodworking, right? And so I thought, well, this is not what I want to do anymore. For one thing, my body is not doing well with it. I had a herniated disc. I had arthritis. I was breathing dust all day long. It just wasn't healthy. So I said, well, what's an identity I could just pick that would change my life? And at the time, like as a teenager, I was an athlete, but I'd let that go in those first 10 years in my 20s. And then around 30, I said, that was when I needed the change. And so I picked a new identity, and I thought, well, I need an extreme change. So it kind of needs to be an extreme new identity. So I picked an identity, I called it fitness freak, which was so not what I was doing. But as soon as I adopted that identity, I started doing different things. And a week later, longer story short, I discovered soccer. And a week later, I was on the field, and there was this moment where I looked down and my shirt was soaked in sweat. And it was this moment where time stood still. And it was this moment where it was like, I'm a new person. This is the first time I've sweated from like physical athletic activity since I was a teenager. And that there was an integration there that happened. And it's not fitness freak for me anymore. This is like, 15, 16 years later, I'm an athlete. I consider myself an athlete, and I do that on purpose because it causes me to do the things that athletes do. I take care of my body. I'm in good shape, right? And that sharpens my mind. It makes me healthier, makes me a more effective and a more fulfilled person. But I chose the identity.
Yeah, I like that because it prevents people from, which is what most people do. They stumble through life into what just like, well, I got to make money, so I'll go get a job I'll go get a job. And then they end up, there's no identity in some like middle management, corporate bureaucracy where you're just like,
Totally.
I'm a mid-tier underwriter. And it's like that. I mean, maybe that's look, there are great underwriters in the world. And there are people that can make money, and there are people that, that have that skill set. And it's like, well, if that's really your identity, then you'll be great at it. But if you're sort of stuck in some nowhere, middle of the road, part of life, then my guess is you have not sort of decided. You just fell into it or whatever. So I like that by saying like, hey, if I said, I'm not an underwriter, I have that skill set or whatever, but like I knew that was not my identity. And actually, I told, I think it hit me one day where I'll say this. I know David's kind of tight on time, but I'll say this last thing is I was talking to a friend of ours named Dustin Heiner. And he was like, real estate. And I owned a couple $1 million of real estate. I did okay in real estate, and I'll buy more as time goes on. But I realized, I was like, man, if somebody writes real estate on my gravestone, I'm going to fucking freak out. I would hate that. I would be really, really upset if that ended up being my identity. And that's when I realized. I was like, okay, there's money in this, but I can't become it because that's not who I am.
Yeah.
So I do think there's power in sort of saying those things out loud. Like, is that really going to make you happy if you say, I am a real estate investor? If people for the next 20 years say, I am a real estate investor, or they define you that way, are you going to be okay with it? Or is that going to frustrate you? Then I think it's a really interesting way to sort of approach it.
Totally.
I know what I'm putting on your tombstone.
Yeah, you're going to put, I wrote this, and now I'm going to be haunted by Alex's ghost forever.
Well, if you weren't so old, I wouldn't be the one writing on your tombstone. But oh man, Brodie, this man, there's a lot in here, and I love that we talked about like the archetype and the the questions to ask and the actionable stuff and like all the different, just a bunch of different types of approaches to walk through ways, because this is it's one of those things where there's a lot of different journeys that people can go on to. It's not a one shoe fits all, one size fits all type of thing. That being said, where can people reach out to you or get a hold of you if they'd like to touch base, ask some questions, talk to you? I'm not going to say that phrase. Talk about purpose.
Yeah, so there's two projects I have on the go. One is for people who are, along with their purpose, they're looking to create financial freedom and financial abundance. A lot of people, because if you don't have your money game together, life can be pretty stressful and take you out. And it'd be really, purpose doesn't matter sometimes if you can't pay the bills, right? So we have a project. I partnered with a guy, Mario Sandoval, who went from 80K to 8 million in a year when he launched his entrepreneurial journey. This was 4 years ago. And we have a project called Money Vision Purpose. Check out the URL, moneyvisionpurpose.com. We have a 2-day live mastermind where he's going to be teaching his strategy on how he did it. And that's May 1st and 2nd. So that's Money Vision Purpose. We're on all the social media platforms. And I have a solo project called The Purpose Quest, thepurposequest.com, where I'm training coaches, training leaders in these purpose codes and in this vehicle, this leadership style called coaching leadership, where you're helping people find their own answers.
I love it.
The purpose
really
quest.
simple to remember domain name. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, gotta keep it simple. Simple's great. All the stuff we talked about here, they're all simple systems. Our thinking will overcomplicate them, but if you take one of the exercises we talked about here and experiment with it, you're going to realize it's a simple process. Just check out, does it work for you? Easy is a totally different thing. Simple does not necessarily mean easy. Sometimes we need to get over some of our preconceptions or our judgments to give ourselves permission to try something new, right? And open a new door. So yeah, as simple as we can make it, the better. And finding things that work versus things that don't work, that's another great approach.
I have a long list of things that don't work.
Me too. Yeah.
Do not recommend.
Oh man, Brodie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for making it real.
Always.